Thank you, Kathy. So, as she said, my name is Max Weakley. Just a little background. I've been doing wildlife photography since 2007. This is myself, my older brother, and my dad in Yellowstone. I have a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from the University of Central Florida. I run my website, Max Bird Facts, and I'm currently the Vice President of Merritt Audubon. So my website I started in 2020. It's where I share my knowledge and love of birds. Currently, I've got 55 articles. There's a lot more in the pipeline that are coming out, but just got to get time for those. One of the things that I'm really proud of as an ongoing project that I've been working on is I'm trying to compile as many places to report banded birds as possible. So some are done by specific government agencies, some are done by individual researchers. So it can be kind of difficult to know where to go. If you are interested in seeing that, this QR code will bring you straight to that web page. So if you have a banded bird that you want to report, send it there. If you have one and it's not on that list, send me an email and I can start looking at where you should go to do that. And on the website, I have general facts explaining how taxonomy works, breaking down anatomy and providing identification tips, and a whole lot more. So these are some of my kind of more favorite articles that I've worked on. So facts about the ruby-throated hummingbird. It's a super small bird, but it can travel across the Gulf of Mexico in one night from Texas to the Yucatan Peninsula. It's pretty incredible. But tons of different facts about them. The most intelligent bird of prey isn't technically the crested caracara here. It's the striated caracara, but it gave a good avenue to talk about the crested caracara and how it is a very intelligent bird of prey. Taxonomic categories. A lot of us in birding, we just go off of science or common names, not necessarily the scientific binomials or digging deeper into the families and the orders of these birds and how they're interconnected. So went into that a little here, tried to make it digestible. And then why are flamingos blue? It's a surprisingly high search question on Google. So it's kind of fun. It's just Photoshop there. You can't do it. Blue is a structural color. The red pigment is a um, chemical-based color on beta carotenoids from the food that the flamingos eat. Same thing with spoonbills and cardinals. All of that kind of red, orange, yellow color comes from diet. So Marion Audubon Society, again, the QR code here is going to be to bring you to our page. It's marionaudubon.org. We do public and member-only birding walks. We have educational programs that we do through Zoom. We work with FWC and FWRI for American Kestrel nest monitoring. That's the image here from this season, one of the nests. We are partners with the Ocala Wetlands Recharge Park, and then we conduct the Christmas bird count for Marion County. So what is birding? The definition is a hobby of watching wild birds in their natural environment. And if any of you have either read the book or watched the movie of A Big Year, the main rules for that are the bird must be wild, it can't be captive, and it has to be alive to be counted for a big year. It's as simple as setting up a bird feeder in your backyard, but it could be as complex as planning a road trip just to find specific birds. Some people also call it bird watching. There's not that much of a difference between the two. So to get started, you need curiosity, patience, and an open mind. Without these, it's going to be very difficult to try and find these typically very small animals that don't like to sit still for very long. Downloading the Merlin Bird ID app is also fantastic. It is completely free. It's run by Cornell. It helps you do audio and photo identification of birds. There's also a step-by-step guide for if you don't have a picture of it, but you have an idea or a memory of what the bird was, you can start working down that list and figure out what it was. Also create an eBird account. Again, it's run by Cornell. It's completely free. It's a great way to uh, know where to find birds, kind of learn and research different birds, but it is a very important resource and tool. And then binoculars also definitely help. So from doing this presentation a couple times, I've gotten some questions about binoculars. So most of us prefer a 10 by 42 or an 8 by 42, or you could have a 10 by 50s. What that means is the 10 is the magnification, so it's 10 times our vision by a 42 millimeter objective lens at the diameter. So the objective lens is the piece of glass that's at the front end of the binoculars, not the one that's going next to your eye. That's the ocular lens. That diameter determines how much light can enter into the binoculars, and it'll affect how clear the image is, if you can use the optic during low light, and just a ton of different performance things. But obviously, the larger you get, the more glass there is, the more weight there is. So there's a give and take to everything. Personally, I think a 10 by 42 is the best kind of middle ground where it's very convenient, very comfortable to carry around all day, but you still have tons of power to go and see and a decent field of view, to be able to get in a wide span, especially if you're scanning over at like Lake Apopka trying to find one of those rare ducks that shows up. So look for good quality brands. Zeiss, Vortex, Kawa, and Swarovski. Swarovski is going to be kind of the cream of the crop, but very expensive. All of these are going to be kind of somewhere in the ballpark of around 500-ish, plus or minus a couple $100. Swarovski is going to be a little further on the high end of that. But you don't have to just get the expensive pairs. I started with a pair of Bushnells. I know a ton of people have Nikons and Nox. There's nothing wrong with them. My first pair of binoculars was $100, but it was a way that I could start getting more into the birding aspect rather than just the wildlife photography aspect. Read customer reviews and talk to other birders. If you can actually get inside of a brick and mortar store, like Bass Pro Shop or something like that, where you can get your hands on these binoculars, by all means do that. Talk to some people at different birding walks. Most of the time, they'll let you take a look through their binoculars, maybe let you hold them, stuff like that, just so you can get an idea before you drop a pretty significant amount of money. So why you should bird? It helps us gain a better understanding of our world. We can find new and fascinating animals and places by going looking for birds. It connects you with like-minded people, like with your club members here. You get moderate exercise, so a little bit of walking. It's not going to be like hitting the gym super hard, but it's still getting blood movement, decreased stress, and these are some of the places that you can get out in nature. This is the Orlando Wetlands. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with this area, but sunrise here is spectacular. And going out to find birds, you get to see these beautiful sunrises. And then golden hour, kind of not quite golden hour, but entering into it in the Ocala National Forest, hunting down some of their special birds. It's just you get to see some really interesting places that are off the beaten path that probably the majority of people living around them don't even know about. These are some articles that have been published in scientific journals on how nature and birds specifically help with mental health. So it's proven to decrease stress. So if you're ever feeling kind of wound up, it's worth going out, just trying to find some birds and reconnect with nature. So eBird is run by Cornell Lab of Ornithology. They run off of the Clemens Checklist 6th edition. There was a recent update to that. So just like Suzanne was saying earlier, where we now have the northern house wren and the southern house wren in Central and South America, there's also the Cozumel wren that's in the island of Cozumel off of the east coast of Mexico. There's I think it was 7 species split. So there's constant updates to it. eBird helps allow us to maintain the most accurate level of our life list as it's being done. It's accessible on the computer and smartphone. They do act differently. I will tell you that. The computer is better for researching and hunting down hotspots and stuff like that, but the phone is definitely more based towards data entry. And again, it's a very easy way to maintain your life list and get notifications for rarities. We'll talk about some of those rare birds here in a minute. So our Florida birds, we have 565 species in Florida. We got a wide array of residents, migrants, vagrants, and exotics. Some are extremely site specific. Others are very widespread across the state, and the numbers do fluctuate during our migration. So some of our resident birds, virtually all of our herons, egrets, ibis, doves, and game birds. Most of our woodpeckers, we have a couple of winter migrants. Some raptors, rails, songbirds, and waterfowl. We have several resident subspecies, and we have one very special endemic species. So the first resident subspecies I'm going to talk about is the Florida mottled duck. So it is a southern bird. Depending on who you talk to, there's no purebred mottled ducks left in Florida, let alone the country. But this, in my opinion, is a purebred. This is from the Orlando Wetlands. So starting from the tail, a hybrid, this would hybridize, sorry, with a mallard duck. And mallards have a very distinct curled tail. There's no curled tail on this, so we're good. The secondary flight feathers have a blue patch and white bordering on the patch for a mottled or mallard duck. Mottled ducks don't have that white patch. The coverts are covering it, so we can't see that detail, so we can't rely on it. The distinction between the very light kind of throat to the very dark base of the neck into the body is another good indicator. And then the beautiful, very smooth, clean, bright yellow beak with the black gape nares and the tip of the beak. So the gape is the flesh at the base of the mouth. Nares are the same as nostrils. It's just the opening for the air passage, and then your tip of the beak. Those are all really clear indicators that this is a male Florida mottled duck. And the non-Florida ones living on the Gulf Coast of Texas and Louisiana, they have a much darker head and they're a little harder to distinguish. One of our resident heron species is my personal favorite one is the little blue heron. You get three color morphs as they grow up. So our first color here is the juvenile. They are pure white and they can be very confusing at first when you're trying to identify against a cattle egret or a snowy egret or something like that. But if you look at the facial skin and the beak, that's how you can get a confident ID on it. So it's got this kind of blue-green to the face, and that dissolves down to a black at the tip of the beak. So very interesting. And we have the piebald uh, immature phase. So this is in between that juvenile here and the adult, where they're starting to get some of that blue in their plumage, but it's not all the way there. So this is my favorite phase. Is very unique look. They don't stay like this for very long, but very cool to see them when they are. And here's the adult where we have that kind of blue purple head and that really consistent clean blue through the body. And our endemic species, the Florida scrub jay. So there are several scrub jay species across the country. Florida, and especially Central Florida, we have the ecosystem that they still require to live in. So it's an oak scrub habitat that covers little less than 2% of our landmass. It is a very ancient ecosystem. The thought process is it came about while the majority of our state was still underwater, so these were little patches of islands. And as the water levels receded, they essentially maintained that island status, and all of the species that were so specialized just stayed in these zones. So the Florida scrub jay is one of those, and it's a really, really cool bird. And we're going to talk about a couple of places where we can see these, but in my opinion, this should be our state bird over the mockingbird since you can only find this in Florida. So our migratory birds, spring migration is March to May and fall is August to November. There's early and late migrants that come in. These are just kind of the typical broad range of where the majority of that movement comes from. Sparrows, warblers, kites, hawks, falcons, gulls, sandpipers, plovers, cranes, hummingbirds, woodpeckers, and a ton of more species. A lot of the species that we see in Florida do come through as migrants. There are resident populations swell during migration, so sandhill cranes for specific. We have resident sandhill cranes that we're going to talk about in one of these sections coming up. But during migration, a lot of those northern populations come down, and so we have this huge mass of sandhill cranes that winter in Florida, and come spring, they all migrate back up to their nesting sites. And nesting is very rare during these migration seasons. There is off-season nesting. The bald eagle is well known for doing winter nesting. The reason that they don't nest during these seasons is because you have that increased presence of your kites, hawks, and falcons. And so increased predators is going to make it more difficult to have a safe environment for offspring, as well as you have now more competitors if you are a songbird with those sparrows and warblers and everything else. So you have lower chances of finding food sources, higher chance of getting eaten, not really the most conducive to having a nest. Many vagrants result from migratory species being blown off course. We're going to get to these in two sections, but vagrants are a really fun group of birds to chase. So the Atlantic flyway is our first flyway of four in the North America, where it goes from the Atlantic coast to the Appalachian Mountains. And Florida kind of acts as our launching point for most of the species that are going to be traveling into Cuba, the Caribbean, into Central and South America. And so they all funnel down through Florida and they'll work their way down into the Keys and then make that final jump. Some will do island hopping to get to their final location in the continent. Others will just stay on the island and hang out through the winter and then head back north for the breeding season. The Mississippi Flyway. This is from the Appalachians to the Great Plains. These funnel down the Gulf Coast. So just like I was saying with the ruby throat, a lot of them will stage in Texas, in the Gulf Coast of Texas, and then make that single shot trip from Texas over to the Horn of the Yucatan, and then work their way down into wherever they're going to be hanging out for the winter. But if we look at both of these overlaid, we can see that Florida has the potential for a lot of these kind of Western, Midwestern birds coming in, as well as our more typical East Coast birds. So this is why I think we're seeing a lot more of these vermilion flycatchers, the ash-throated flycatchers, scissortails, for some reason, a lot of flycatchers, but different Western birds that you shouldn't really accept or expect for Florida are becoming a little bit more frequent coming here. So one of our migratory raptors is going to be the short-tailed hawk. And so this is in a two color morphs. So color morphs are not the same as like a subspecies. Subspecies, there's a lot more difference to it. Color morphs, just think of it as like blonde versus brunette kind of thing. So the light morph here, we have really, really clean underwing coverts, very fine pinstriping on the flight feathers. Again, on the tail, you can see it better on the dark morph here. But if you look at the two of them, they have a lot of those shared characteristics. So the dark wing tips are shared. That pinstriping, as said before, is shared. The band across the tail, which isn't all the way at the end, is also shared. And then even though they're different colors, there's no marking on them. But you can see tiny little bit of marking on the flanks there. So very nice, somewhat rare depending on what part of the state you're in, hawk that we get. Yellow-bellied sapsucker. This is the migratory wintering woodpecker that we have. Very cool bird. The name perfectly describes its behavior and appearance. So the yellow-bellied, it's got a little bit of a yellow wash to the belly there. And then sapsucker, what they do to feed is they'll actually peck onto trees, not deep enough to really go after insects, but just to make them bleed sap and then drink the sap, the nectar. So yellow-bellied sapsucker, it's pretty perfect for this species, in my opinion. And then hooded warblers, we get tons of warblers. The vast majority of the warblers that we get in Florida are migratory. Very few of them are residents. So hooded warblers are one of those where they kind of just use the state to move in and out of North America for the spring and South America and Central America for the winter. But beautiful bird, just stunning bright yellow color, drastic contrast with the hood here. This is a male. Females are a little bit lighter yellow. They're still very bright for female warblers. And then the hood is more of a muted gray rather than this really bold black. So our exotic species, they're primarily from neotropic or tropical environments. Uh, Primarily, they're escapees from the pet trade in zoos. Some are released by individuals. The main thing with exotic species across the world is they're typically more aggressive and highly competitive, and that's how they can get a foothold in a new ecosystem and get established. They typically have quick reproductive rates and very low levels of natural predators because, again, the animals in our area didn't evolve to try and hunt these animals that are from sometimes completely on the other side of the world. But we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but sometimes some of these exotic species are beneficial to the overall population of potentially an endangered species. So for us in Florida, we're very familiar with the Muscovy duck. The pre-Columbian societies domesticated these. So in Central and South America, this is essentially what they had for chickens. Instead of chickens, they also had turkeys. But as the conquistadors came over, they wanted to export as much as they could from the New World. One of the things that they were exporting was the Muscovy duck. And the theory is, it's not 100% confirmed, but the theory is that they got the name Muscovy duck from the Muscovy company that was an import and exporter to the New World. So Little fun fact there. The gray-headed swamp hen, we are very familiar with this. They are very well established in Lake Apopka. There's been reports of them showing up closer to where I am in Emeralda Marsh in Lake County. They're showing up kind of all over the place. They most likely came sometime in the early 90s. The main theory is that they were set loose due to damage to zoos in 1992 from Hurricane Andrew, and the first reporting of them in Florida and specifically in Pembroke Pines, just north of Miami, was in 1996. So the theory kind of holds some pretty good water for them to lay low for a couple of years, start bulking up their population, and then someone goes out and notices them. So uh, they compete directly with the purple gallinules. That is our native version of this bird. This bird comes from India, Pakistan, kind of the Near East, Middle East zones. A little larger, definitely more aggressive. I've seen them fight purple gallinules and common gallinules and American coots, kind of all fit within that same niche. So pretty bird, but not good for our native species, unfortunately. And then monk parakeets. So Florida and the Southeast in general had parakeet species, the Carolina parakeets, for thousands of years, and unfortunately, we killed them all as humans. And now we've got these quote unquote invasive parrots that have moved into South Florida, and some have gotten up into parts of Central Florida. We've got a population of monk parakeets in Orlando, and I think it's kind of cool. I really like parrots. They're one of my favorite groups of birds, and just watching them kind of refill the empty niche that was left by the Carolina parakeets is an interesting kind of topic of conversation. So our vagrant birds, these are rare visitors to the state, and the main difference between a vagrant and a exotic is that they arrive via natural means. Sometimes they stay for extended periods, like these vermilion flycatchers and the scissortails. A lot of the flycatchers, for some reason, like to hang out for a little while before they leave, but most of them will typically leave as soon as possible. They're usually blown in by storms from the Atlantic or the Gulf of Mexico. This is the theory, at least. The f- and the frequency of the vagrants is increasing. Like, there's a couple of camps on this where it's increasing. Climate change is causing the birds to have to look at new potential territories. Uh, there's the other camp saying that there are more birders than there have ever been, and we are more interconnected via the internet than we've ever been. People that typically would have kept physical life lists, now we're throwing them onto eBird, and that can go on to rare bird alerts. I'm personally more in that camp. We have more eyes finding these birds that look fairly similar to some of our more normal birds. It makes more sense in my mind. So one of the ones from this year that was a really big rare bird was the piratic flycatcher. And this was at Fort DeSoto in April, and it is a Central American bird, and it migrates into southern, southeastern Mexico during the breeding season, and they winter in Costa Rica, Panama, sometimes a little bit into northern South America, but primarily the theory is with this guy is as it was moving up the Gulf Coast of not Texas of Mexico, it got pulled in by a storm, and the first place that it saw to land was in Fort DeSoto. Fort DeSoto is so heavily birded that someone saw that this was not very typical, photographed it, and it lit up eBird. So it's the second time this species has been seen in the state. It was insane seeing the numbers of people going to find this bird. So very cool, well worth getting. It was gone in a couple of days, so it was really, really neat to get to see this species. Bridal turns, this was from the most recent hurricane from Milton. Thankfully, the area where I live wasn't too badly affected, so I was able to get out and try and find some of these storm birds. Uh, in the previous years, I'd found magnificent frigate birds, bridled, and sooty terns. This is in Lake Eustis. And this year I was able to find some bridal terns again. So had a nice little group of them, very distant photos, so not the best for views, but more than enough for identification. It's not the best on this. You can kind of see on this guy here, but the bridal terns have very, very clean underwings and a very strong, bold black trailing edge to the wing. So really nice to find these typical pelagic species that hang out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico and only come to the Keys and other islands to breed all the way in the center of the state. And the Pacific golden plover, this was in the villages. So the Pacific versus the American, the way to identify them is you have this continuous white that runs all the way from the eyebrow to the tail. The American golden plover, it kind of stops right here. So this flight photo, while it's not the best photo I have of it, it's the best photo for a very clear identification. Again, rare, but in a relatively high populated area in the right environment where you're going to have people that know what birds are looking for. So that's why I kind of lean more towards that idea personally. So how do you find birds? You got to learn the species, listening for calls and looking for signs. So this cardinal here is singing very distinct song. Once you kind of tune your ear to it, once you hear them, you can usually dial into it pretty quick. This northern flicker with a very clear cavity nest there, looking for these signs of use or the kind of beat up top of this palm tree where it's been feeding for a while. Those are all good indicators for activity. Stand still. So if you think of when you kind of walk into a room and it all goes quiet and you give it a couple of seconds and the room comes back to life, treat the woods or wherever you're birding at the same. When you enter in, the birds don't know if you're there to try and hunt them or not. So just letting everything kind of cool off before you start running around looking for all of them is probably a good idea. And then you got to get outside. You can get some birds by sitting in your house, looking out your window at your bird feeders, but there's a very small percentage of our birds that are in Florida that do come to our bird feeders. So where do birds hang out? It really depends on the species lifestyle. Some birds are very more common in different locations than others, like that Florida scrub jay. If you try and go into downtown Gainesville and you're really looking in the city park for one of these scrub jays, you're going to have a really hard time finding it. Versus if you research where one of these oak scrub habitats is, go out there and start looking there, you're going to have a much better chance. Look for water and food sources. Everything has to eat and drink. Inspect trees for cavity nests and droppings. Look for that activity and signs of it. Stock eBird list. I've done this a ton, especially for trying to hunt down lifers or trying to hunt down a rare bird that could boost my numbers in a county. If people are leaving information on the list itself in the comment section or just the general notes of the list, that's super helpful. So if you do that and that's the case for one of the ones that you do end up finding, pass the knowledge on so that way if someone else is trying to do it like you, you're helping them as well. So these are my top 10 hotspots for Central Florida. We're going to work north to south and then east-west. So Paynes Prairie Preserve State Park in Alachua, through Ocala Wetlands Recharge Park, the Ocala National Forest, Silver Spring State Park, Emeralda Marsh Conservation Area, Lake Apopka North Shore, the Orlando Wetlands, Joe Overstreet Landing, Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, and Fort DeSoto Park. We're going to talk about all of these in depth. I'm going to leave this up for just a minute if anyone wants a screenshot, take a picture with their phone. But I am currently working on an article on breaking down all of this, kind of making it a little bit shorter version of this presentation in a permanent format on my website. So starting in Paynes Prairie, this is in Alachua County. We have 276 species here. Some of the main areas to bird are Lachua Trail, the 441 Observation Deck, Cones Dyke Trail, and Bolden Bluff. It's a very important wintering site for sandhill cranes. It's well-established Florida snailkite territory, and it's an introduced American bison from Oklahoma in 1975, and it's a great area to view American alligators, Florida cracker horses, white-tailed deer, and many more species. So the sandhill cranes, this is a kind of wide view from the watchtower on Lachua Trail. The watchtower is no longer open, but just to give you an idea of the expanse, we've got some flying over here. There's the bison in the background. There's definitely some heat mirage that's working against the camera, but we have sandhill cranes kind of filling every space that we can all the way out back here into the kind of flooded field. So The reason why this is so important for the sandhill cranes is they don't have a hind toe. So if you think of a bird's foot, if you take your hand, fold your pinky down and extend your fingers out, that's the typical bird foot. Bird foot. Fold your thumb back, and that's what the sandhill crane has. So it's only got those front three toes. And so because of that, they can't grab onto a perch and then rest and roost in a tree. If they were to do that, try and stand on it. A nice gust of wind blows, they fall asleep and their legs buckle or whatever happens, they're going to fall out of the tree. So it's not going to be safe for them to stay in that kind of an area, especially also with their size. They're going to need a lot of space to expand their wings. So instead, they go to these flooded fields where it's a very shallow amount of water. And if anything tries to sneak up on them in the middle of the night, they can hear that and then either make an alarm, fly off in the night, reposition, try and fight off the attacker, whatever it is, but it gives them a better chance than just staying out in a completely dry field or trying to deal with staying on those trees. So with the numbers of the sandhill cranes coming in, there's the potential of finding whooping cranes. So whooping cranes are critically endangered for the North America. They are one of, if not our largest bird, is definitely our largest wading bird that we have. And this individual, we've got a radio tag as well as the federal aluminum tag and an identifying tag. So when you find this on that page I have on my website, I have a link to whooping crane tracking. I'd seen this crane specifically come to the end of the Lachua Trail for 3 years, and I reported all 3 years once I had found where to report it. So it's really good to do that for researchers so they can get an idea of the patterns that these birds are doing. This one was moving with sandhill cranes. Unfortunately, there were no other whooping cranes with it. There's a program that was done several years ago to try to rebuild the whooping crane migration path to piggyback off of sandhill cranes. Unfortunately, it never really came to fruition. And it looks like this might be one of those birds from that. Snail kites. So this is a male. Males have this really nice gray throughout the body, the orange feet, kind of yellow orange facial skin, blood red eye, and then you've got this really broad white to the vent and the rump, and then a white end to the tail. So Florida snail kites are pretty unique. Snail kites in general aren't an endangered species, but the Florida snail kite, it's kind of a relic population that is stuck in the state, and they are classified as a regional endangered species. So they are on the decline, but because of invasive apple snails that have come into Florida and into other states, they have had a bit of a resurgence in their population and an increase in their range. So non-native apple snails are significantly larger than native apple snails. One of the concerns originally was it would be too big for snail kites to be able to actually pick them up and carry them off to eat them. But there is evolution working in real time where we are having deeper beak or deeper hooks to the upper beak, upper mandible. We're having longer talons to be able to hold on to those bigger snails. You have thicker legs with more musculature to also try and hold on to the snails better. So it's very interesting to see that work and see the population of the snail kite have a little bit of a boom. It does come at the cost of a lot of other native species, but there's at least one positive. And then here we have that Florida cracker horse and then a Western cattle egret, another one of those splits that came last year, I believe. Um, but it's the Lachua Trail pretty much throughout the Paynes Prairie is a great place to find horses, wild horses. These are from the Spanish, and they were used by the original settlers coming into Florida. They're called cracker horses because of the rawhide whips that the horsemen would use to corral the cattle that they ranched in Florida. But very cool, interesting little piece of our area. The Ocala Wetlands Recharge Park, this is Marion County. We have 181 bird species. It functions to clean stormwater by passing it through a series of cells before re-entering the aquifer. It's a very easily accessible 2.5 miles of trail that's just about 3 miles from downtown Ocala. So if you're ever in Ocala, look up the Ocala Wetlands Recharge Park and give it a try. It's well worth it. It's really, really well put together. If for some reason, again, it's one of those, it's near a high population area, lots of people go to it, a lot of rarities show up into this area. And part of that could be because of the very diverse array of habitats and the very healthy habitat that can support that avifauna. And it's also a very good place to see fox squirrels outside of the national forest. So red-headed woodpeckers, this is again like the fox squirrel. It's one of the very few places that you can regularly see these. There is a community that was built across the street from across the fence really from the wetlands where the main nesting area was for the red-headed woodpecker. So unfortunately their numbers are down, but they still are nesting in the park, which is good to see. So he's had some fledglings on a recent outing there. So it's nice to know that they're still hanging out, but they are a little harder to find now than they were a few years ago. Blue grosbeaks, this is a really good place to find them as well. This is a young male. You can see the blue in the head, a little bit of blue kind of poking through that brown in the plumage. Cape May warblers, these are a relatively rare bird depending on where you're at. This is a male. You have the orange cheek here, really bright yellow, and then the striping through the body and then through the eye. So these will hang out typically at the tops of the trees, kind of pick their way around and then fly to a next location as they're working their way either to or from their nesting sites up in the north. Vermilion flycatcher. This is actually a two for one. So this is a female that has now shown up for 3 years. It's pretty incredible that we've got this western bird that's most likely from that Mississippi flyway that has returned to the park for the past 3 years without fail and has stayed the entire fall and winter season up until the migration. So very cool to have this bird. It's kind of turned into the local mascot of the wetlands alongside the red-headed woodpecker, but wonderful species that we get to have. And then here's that Sherman's fox squirrel. So the kind of black mask and then darker over and lighter below is the typical color morph that we have in Central Florida. So the Ocala National Forest, you have Marion Lake counties. Depending on where you're at, it's 150 to 200 species. Clearwater Lake Restoration Area, Hopkins Prairie, Sunset Trail, Alexander Springs, and Forest Road 88 are kind of the main hotspots. You have oak hammocks, pine savannas, oak scrub are the main habitats with extensive area covering much of north central Florida. And you have to kind of treat the areas of activity of where these birds are as islands. They're kind of scattered around. So during the spring and summer is a really good place to find common nighthawks. It's a wonderful crepuscular bird, so dawn and dusk active and also nocturnal. So they're a great aerial insectivore. The brown-headed nuthatch is another one of the forest birds you'll struggle to find outside of the forest or a very similar ecosystem. Very small bird. They have this kind of squeaky toy call, but it's our only native nuthatch that we get in Florida. Sometimes in North Florida, they'll have white-breasted nuthatches, but the brown head gets the name from the top of the head, is the only one that we have consistently across the state. Florida scrub jays, there are pockets of this oak scrub habitat throughout the national forest. And so if you go onto eBird into the explore function and search by species, search the Florida scrub jay, you'll see how kind of separated all of these different zones are for the scrub jays. But the national forest is one of the best places that you can see relatively large groups of this threatened species. Red cockaded woodpeckers. There are other places for the red cockadeds. It's another one of those regional endangered species. They're overall a least concern because of populations in East Texas and Mississippi, Alabama. But for us in Florida, they're very, very, very site specific, and there are some really good locations in the national forest to locate these birds. And then a rare one for us, not necessarily for population wise, but for some reason the national forest is not always great for, but you can usually find hairy woodpeckers in the winter. Um, it's a rare bird for Central Florida. They're typically a more northern bird, but it's almost identical to the downy woodpecker, except for the beak is significantly longer. It's about the length of the head, and it is a significantly larger bird too. It's hard to see if you don't have them side by side, but if you do, it's very easy to notice. Silver Spring State Park. This is also Marion County. They have 162 species with the Silver River, Ray Wayside Park, and the Head Spring. It's a pristine freshwater ecosystem with a vital nesting area. Cypress swamps, oak hammock, upland scrub, and pine savannas is an important destination for tourists seeking the original Florida. It's one of the best places, in my opinion, to find wood ducks. Very healthy population of these out here. We have the male on the left and the female on the right, but that beautiful amount of coloration in the plumage of the male is spectacular, and they're very, very healthy on the Silver River. Swallowtail kites, well, the Silver River is not the only place you can find these. They are pretty plentiful. The swallowtail kites, for me personally, are my indicator for migration, either starting to come in or starting to leave. The swallowtails are typically the first ones in, first ones out kind of mentality, where as soon as you see a swallowtail in the beginning of spring, you know that migration is about to kick off. Once you stop seeing them in the fall, that's how you know migration has begun. So since they're a large bird, they're pretty easy to keep track of, and so that's where I use them for my metric. Anhingas or snakebirds, water turkeys are apparently another common name for them. But anhingas are not rare, but the Silver River is a vital nesting site for them. We have a breeding pair of the male here on the left and the female here on the right. We have the beautiful turquoise skin around the eyes, the black gular, which is much more noticeable on the female versus on the male. And then they both get these really, really bright yellow-orange feet. Yellow-crowned night herons, again, not necessarily an uncommon bird, but for Central Florida, away from the coast, it is. So Lake Apopka also does have yellow-crowned night herons. It kind of depends on the location you're at, and there's other little areas where you can find them in, like the Orlando wetlands. But for Marion County specifically, this is the only place to find them, and you have to be on the river to get them. So very unusual kind of mangrove coastal bird that has decided to have a pretty strong population in the Silver River. Prothonotary warblers, these are very interesting. So it's the only warbler we have in the east that is a secondary cavity nester. So it takes cavity nests from preferably downy woodpeckers, which is interesting. I think it has to do with the size of the downy woodpecker is similar to the prothonotary warbler. So the diameter of the opening is small enough that it won't have to fight other birds for that cavity, like a eastern screech owl or something else that is a secondary cavity nester. So kind of interesting that they prefer downies, and downies are all over on the Silver River, so makes perfect sense. And then we have the rhesus macaques. So these are a very well established feral band of monkeys that are living on the river. The story is that they were shipped in from Asia to be on the Tarzan Island to be a little attraction there, and the person that made the purchase didn't realize they're semi-aquatic. And so when they were released, they immediately jumped off the island and fled into the swamp. And so they've been pretty pretty prevalent across the river since then. So Emeralda Marsh, this is in Lake County. There are 214 species here. You have the Wildlife Drive, boat ramp, and bull hammock. It's an expansive freshwater marsh with wetland cypress swamps and oak hammocks, and it's critical wintering grounds for waterfowl with resident pairs of snailkites. So redheads are one of the larger birds that we get, or waterfowl rather, that we get. And we have a male or a drake above and a female below. Uh, it can be kind of hard identifying waterfowl specifically. They can, especially the females, they can get a little similar. But if we look at some features that they have, obviously the profile and the outline is identical between the two individuals. But the beak here on the male, you have this kind of blue-gray color to the upper bill, and it's got this black line that runs across the edge, and then the black tip. The female is much duller, but it has that same kind of blue-gray, and it's got the black lipstick running all the way across too. So one way to make that positive ID, as well as very clean underwings. You don't really have the same body markings between the male and the female, but that underwing is very consistent, as well as that kind of very soft gray trailing edge as well. Snail kites. So again, it's another great location to find snail kites. This is a juvenile, which is great. That means that they had a successful breeding season. And this is one of those non-native apple snails. So they are very large compared to the standard apple snails. They uh, produce far more eggs. They're more aggressive in what they eat. They can lay their eggs further out of water, so they're more adaptable because they come from an environment where there's more competition. Since there's not a lot of competition here in Florida, unfortunately, they do very well. But fortunately for the snail kites, they now have more food. Limpkins are another bird that rely on apple snails. They are having a really big boom in their population. There's even some sightings of them coming in from places like Ohio and in Indiana and kind of up in the nor Midwest, which is crazy because this is typically thought of as a south bird or a southern bird, and specifically Gulf or kind of Florida, Louisiana. So great species. It's got a very unique beak where the lower mandible has a slight rightward bend to it. It's very sharp, and they can use that to cut around the operculum or that kind of little trap door on the uh, apple snail and cut it away, break the suction, and then pull the snail out. Or it can use the upper mandible of the beak as a hammer to smash through the shell too. So very interesting bird, very well evolved to hunt a very specific prey item. And because that prey item has now increased, they have a larger range. Purple gallinules, these are our native version of that gray-headed swamp hen. So beautiful bird. It's a southeastern bird that we're very privileged to have. Um, there's no sexual dimorphism, so no difference between male and female, but the adults get this blue crown, the red at the kind of base of the beak all the way up until the tip where it turns that nice yellow. And then they have this phase of almost purplish blue down to a teal in the wings and the tail. So beautiful bird. They've got really long legs so they can walk across lilies and kind of stride through vegetation very easily in the swamp and the marsh. Black and white warbler. These are a winter bird for us. They are a nice indicator of the migration being in full swing. So they'll hang out with us. Some will move into the Caribbean, into South America, but still very nice to see them. This is for me personally is a nice accomplishment. This photo I was able to get into the Ocala Star banner. And it's the first photo I've had published in a newspaper, so very proud of that. And just a really lucky right place, right time kind of an image with this male. Lake Apopka. So we have Lake and Orange counties. So there are 346 species here. You have the Wildlife Drive, McDonald Canal Boat Ramp, Clay Island Loop Trail, and Newton Park. It's the fourth largest lake in Florida, and the large expanse of water attracts vast groups of wandering waterfowl. And the marsh flowway started in 2003 to remove phosphorus from the lake. So fulvous whistling ducks, this is a very widespread species across pretty much the entire globe. You can find these in South America, in Africa, in India, and there's only a handful of places in Florida or in the United States as a whole that you can find this bird. So for some reason, they've started to kind of move into the state of Florida and become established. And in my opinion, the only place that you can frequently find this bird is Lake Apopka. There's no other place that if you were to ask me if you could go to one spot to find this bird and almost have a 100% guarantee to find it, this is the only place I would recommend to go. The least bittern, these are very shy, and during the breeding season, they can be a little easier to spot because they have to move around from their nest site to forage more. So this male I had surprised by pulling around the corner, and I had spotted him. So he froze, which thankfully I was lucky and I got a nice shot. But 9 times out of 10, it's going to result on by the time the camera's up, they've already taken flight, and so you get kind of a flying away butt shot. So not the best, but got very lucky with this. Lake Apopka does have very good amounts of prey for these animals, so the populations are really good. So again, during that breeding season, you can see a lot of activity from least bitterns that outside of here you typically wouldn't find. Great blue heron. So again, not a uncommon bird, but because of the diversity of the park and how healthy of an ecosystem it is, you can see a lot of behaviors that might not be the most common. So this great blue heron eating a marsh rabbit is kind of brutal, but it's a way to kind of make you remember that we live in a time of dinosaurs. Caspian terns, these are another worldwide species. They're named after the Caspian Sea. It's the largest tern in the world, but Lake Apopka is, again, because it's such a healthy ecosystem, you have plenty of fish for these birds to feed off of that you can have huge groups of, for Caspian terns, this is pretty big, of these individuals, and it gets to the point where this is flagged as a high count alert according to eBird. So very interesting. I counted the beaks. There's 14. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a tip right there. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 laying down. 11, 12, 13, 14. Maybe another one over here, but apparently 14 is too much for eBird to count for Orange County, but cool to see and photograph to prove it. Peregrine falcons are arguably one of the most specialized predators that we get in our area. So these are 100% bird hunters. So the peregrine, it will fly to pretty good altitude, locate a target that it wants to take out, go into a nosedive, get into the speeds of around 180 to 200 miles an hour, and then right before it impacts, it makes a fist with this talon and sucker punches the bird that it's hunting. So it could be a duck, it could be a pigeon. There's video of them attacking pelicans, so they're very aggressive species. But once they've either stunned it or potentially already broken the prey item's neck, it's hard to see, but right here, kind of where that color transition is, there's a increase in the upper bill. It's called a terminal tooth, and it's a force multiplier. So when the bird bites on that point, it will increase the bite force that it has and make it more easy and more efficient to snap the neck of its prey. So very brutal, but extremely efficient. And they are a relatively common sight during the winter in Lake Apopka because of all of the waterfowl that hang out there. And yellow warblers, these are another migratory species. So by now, pretty much all of them are gone or they're in the Miami area about to make their final jump into the Caribbean and to South America. But the willows in and around Lake Apopka on the Wildlife Drive, I have had a really good success finding them. But just like with this, they don't really like to come out too often to get their portrait taken. So the Orlando Wetlands Park, this is in Orange County. There are 253 species. It's a wastewater reclamation system for Orange and Seminole counties. It processes 35 million gallons a day, and it takes 40 days for that to completely process. It's 100 or 1,200 acres of pristine wetland ecosystem. It's extremely active rookery during the nesting season. So one of the best places to find black-bellied whistling ducks and get really good views of high volumes of them is the Orlando wetland. So very cool bird, they're very social. You'll see them kind of doing acrobats and fighting with each other in the air. And you can see that pretty often because there's such a high population here. Barred owls, due to the health of the wetlands, there's a lot of amphibians. Barred owls, they love frogs. That's one of their favorite food sources. So because of that increase in prey item, we also have a pretty high and healthy population of predators. So it's a very good place if you're looking for barred owls. The tip for owls is if you're trying to find them to see them, go at dawn or dusk, either when they're just finishing up their hunting at night at dawn or when they're just starting to get geared up and ready once it's starting, the sun's starting to go down. Sandhill crane. So this is our proof of a subspecies. So the Pradiensis subspecies of the sandhill crane is the Florida group. That I believe was changed from Pradiensis to just say Florida and eBird with this recent update. But that is our breeding population that does not ever leave the state. And this little chick is proof of it. Soras are a rail that we have that is a winter rail. So a lot of them come in to Florida. We have them now. They're back in pretty decent numbers, but for whatever reason, the Orlando wetlands is one of the few places that I've been able to see several of these birds. So very shy. They'll hang out in the reeds and the um, sedge, and they don't want to come out. You'll hear them all the time. You'll hear the calls, the whinny calls that they make, but it's very rare to actually spot one. But if you want to try and get a good look at one, the Orlando wetlands, for whatever reason, is actually very good for that. American bittern, it's another one of those skulky birds that doesn't like to come out in the open. Most of the time when I've seen these, they've been flush and fly out because you've walked too close to them where they were hiding because you couldn't see it, and fly because of that you're not ready, you can't get the photo. But if you can see where they land and you know roughly the area where they're moving, if you watch the top of the grass, you can see it kind of move. What they'll do, and we can see with this individual, they'll get their body low to the ground and elongate their neck and then sneak through the grass to try and make as little disturbance as possible. But if it's tall enough, it doesn't matter, you're going to see it. And so you can pan in the direction of that movement and potentially see where it's moving to. So if you find an opening in that vegetation and you potentially could get an open shot, you could wait for it to come out into the open and then get the photo. It's not, that's what I did here. It's not perfect. There's a lot of foreground in the way, but it's still better than nothing. And then painted buntings, these are a winter bird for us. What's interesting is that there's two different populations of painted buntings. They're connected, but they are very different in their behaviors and the ways that they molt in their plumage. But in general, you have this really beautiful red on the chest and the yellow right at the base of the throat, and then red underneath the throat, red on that ring around the eye, blue on the head, and then green on the back. Just a beautiful bird. They're stunning to see them. And the females are a kind of blue-greenish color. It's very good camouflage. It's very effective camouflage. But they are considered a sensitive species when they come into Florida because they are just here to hang out for the winter, get some fat reserves, and then head back up into the Atlantic coast to do their breeding season. So Joe Overstreet Landing, this is in Osceola County. They have 233 species, and it's the north edge of the Kissimmee Prairie. This is about where I start cutting off my definition of Central Florida. It's surrounded by sod and cattle farms, and again, southern edge of Central Florida, and it's very active after heavy rainstorms. It's also another spot where you can find Florida snail kites. So again, that area around the lake allows you to have kind of shallow, flooded, not grasslands, but essentially that kind of marsh-ish environment, which is really good for apple snails. And so the apple snails are pretty well established in this area. So limpkins and snail kites have a good food source, and because of that, they stay in this area pretty consistently. This is a female. You can tell by the white color here. With the juvenile, is more of a buff color. And then again, on that throat there, it's white instead of buff. Crested caracaras, there's a handful of places that you can find these throughout Central Florida. Even going into Western Florida and Southwest Florida, they're a little bit more common there. But they have, it's a very interesting bird. So these are falcons. They're not vultures like a lot of people think they are. They have very similar behaviors and lifestyles to vultures. They're very um, opportunistic with their food. They'll eat carrion. They don't care. They'll pick off insects. They'll eat reptiles, small reptiles, amphibians, mammals, other birds. They're very, very not picky. But they have, instead of like their cousins like the peregrine, they've got flat talons, so it allows them to walk on the ground a lot more efficiently than if they had curved talons that would be catching on stuff all the time. It was the part that intrigues me the most with the crested caracaras is they are classified as a relic species, similar to the Florida snail kite, but the way that they became isolated in Florida is because the grassland ecosystem that still is in Kissimmee, it or the Kissimmee Prairie, it disappeared between where it is now all the way to Texas, where their current range kind of cuts off at. And there's this movement of caracaras getting further and further east, following roadways and roadkill. So there is the potential that we could have a reconnection between the western Texas, Mexico caracaras and the Florida caracaras sometime in the future. It could be decades, it could be centuries, who knows? It could never happen, but just an interesting thought. Northern bobwhites, these are a game bird, so they're very shy. They get hunted, so they associate humans with uh, dying. So it's not easy to find them easily like this to get a nice clean photo of, but there are very healthy populations of northern bobwhite in Joe Overstreet and in the road leading up to Joe Overstreet Landing. So if you want to see bobwhites, then this is definitely somewhere I would recommend for that. Upland sandpipers. This is an odd bird as far as the thought process of a typical sandpiper, where you think of it more as a shorebird. This is actually a grassland endemic species to the Great Plains. So think North Dakota. They go all the way up into the Yukon Territory into Alaska, as far as as the furthest point of their um, breeding range. But they move through Florida during their migration. Again, they use this as that kind of launching point going into Central and South America, where as they're flying, they're looking for their native grassland habitat. And so the prairie that's in Kissimmee is perfect for them. And so August is typically the best time to find these. And if you keep an eye on the radar and the rain, you can usually find a lot of these. I found three of them at once with pectoral sandpipers and a few other species right after a good rainstorm, and they were just working in a field and being totally fine. So super interesting. Their wintering grounds are in the Pampas, which means plains in Argentina and Uruguay. But so they want to find that same kind of habitat wherever they're going, whether it's nesting season, migration, or in the winter. Loggerhead shrike. So this is my personal favorite bird. This is the bird that's in the logo for my website. They are very unique. So it's a relatively medium-sized songbird, about the size of a mockingbird, roughly, but much bulkier. So they're more muscularized because they are 100% predators. So these birds will sing and mimic other bird songs to lure them in and think that they're totally fine and there's nothing wrong. And then the shrike will attack the other songbird, kill it. It's also got that terminal tooth that the peregrine has, so extremely efficient evolution to make it a very deadly predator. And then they will spike their victim onto either barbed wire or naturally it would be some form of a thorn bush. And that's how they get their nickname of being a butcher bird, where they're the same as a butcher putting a piece of meat on their hook and then taking it apart piece by piece as they need it. So very interesting bird, not kind of what you would typically think of when you see this bird at first, but it's uh it's my gateway bird, so it's very cool. So Merritt Island, so we are now on the east coast in Brevard County. There are 318 species here. The main points of interest are Black Point Wildlife Drive, Scrub Ridge Trail, Pump House Road, and Max Brewer Causeway. It's a very pristine brackish mangrove and intercoastal ecosystems and is very important for waterfowl in the winter with there are pockets of that ancient oak scrub habitat. So one of those waterfowl species that we have is the northern shoveler, and this is a another one of those pretty wide, globally spread species. But what's cool about it is they have projections of keratin in their beak that act the same as baleen for whales, so they can filter feed very efficiently for small planktonic size animals and eat them. So very specialized hunting style. That mangrove brackish water is really good for making different insect larvae, which would fall into the size category. If you've ever been to brackish areas, you know that mosquitoes can be pretty thick, so northern shovelers are a really good way to help fight that. American avocets, they are very beautiful, very kind of graceful looking shorebirds. The interesting thing to just kind of break down to get you interested, hopefully to get you interested in your Latin binomials, Rickerostrata if you break that down into the two components, you have recurve. So that means that upward curve. Rostra is mouth or beak. Americana, which would mean American, so American there. It's the only avocet species that exists in America. So in the Americas, so North and South. So very beautiful bird, very interesting probing species. They're related to the blackneck stilt, but one of the places you can find them is over at Merritt Island. The black skimmer, you can find these on the coast as well. So it is a tern or a relative of a tern or a gull, but it has a very unique beak to where when it's flying, it'll drop its lower mandible into the water and use that to skim where it gets its name uh, across until they feel it bump into something. At that point, they'll snap their beak shut and then fly away with the prey item. Hopefully, it's prey and not just some garbage, but it is a very, very energetic, taxing method of hunting. So, because of the resistance of the water, you can kind of see it's not the greatest, but there's little striations on the beak. Those are there to help try and cut through the water, make it more efficient. But even still, the water resistance as they're flying through is really, really taxing. So they have to be hunting a lot. It's a very beautiful thing to watch the skimmers work. Rosette spoonbills, these are more common than our flamingos, but you'll usually get someone call it a flamingo if they're not too familiar with birding. But they have this wide spoon-shaped bill. This is flat, so it's hard to see, but it allows a lot of nerve endings to be in and around this tip. So as they're hunting, they leave their mouth slightly opened and they move in a scanning motion. If you think of someone on the beach using a metal detector to scan for change or something that's in the sand, that same kind of movement. And what they're doing is they're trying to sense out where prey is, and then once they do, they snap shut on it and then swallow it whole. So whatever that is, this spoonbill is about to swallow it. And then the Florida scrub jays. So this is that oak scrub habitat. The Scrub Ridge Trail is specifically for, not for these guys, it wasn't built for them, but it is it's a very good area to find scrub jays. So this is a young one. It's a fledgling. You can still see some of that natal down in the body, and then it's got some blue that's very clear in the wings and the tail. But what's interesting about the scrub jays is their intelligence is to the point where they know the expiration date of food that they store. So this cicada, if this scrub jay wasn't about to eat it, they would know within a certain time frame that it would rot and they can no longer eat it. When they do caches, they do this knowingly, and so they can return to a cache that they know is about to expire faster and leave caches, say for acorns, for longer until they are at the point where they have no food and they have to go to those acorns to then survive. Acorns are a really big thing for the scrub jays is how they stay and they've survived for so long, and that intelligence being in these very restricted areas was forced by how difficult it is to survive where they are. And then the cinnamon teal, there's one that's been showing up for the past couple of years. It's not 100% clear if it's the same bird or not. There's people that have claimed that it was hunted one year and then it showed up the following year. So it's a little muddy with this one compared to the vermilion flycatcher. But this is another one of those western birds that most likely came from the Mississippi flyway. So the theory is that large flocks of blue-winged teal and mixed flocks with pintails and green-winged teal and shovelers and gadwall, they'll all congregate and move. And the cinnamon teal got confused and went with the blue-winged teal in that mixed flock, and then came to Merritt Island and hung out because he's already there, so why not? So this is a male. That beautiful cinnamon color is here in the body, and that really, really drastic red eye as well. So blue-winged teals are very different. Even a female will have a little bit darker coloring, a longer beak, and that red eye too. But since it's a male, it's a much easier identification. And then finally, we have the Fort DeSoto Park. This is in Pinellas County on the west coast. There are 352 species here. It's the furthest west point on peninsular Florida. It has open beach, palm and pine hammocks, and brackish mangrove ecosystems. It's a nesting area for many shorebirds, and it's the first stopping point for flying eastward across the Gulf of Mexico. And it's very common for rare and unusual species to be found here during migrations, like that piratic flycatcher. And so the first one we're going to talk about is the American oyster catchers. So this is a very cool bird. Um, they are extremely site specific for where they set up and kind of stay. They need oyster beds and clams as their only food source. So if you don't have a healthy population of the prey item, it's very rare to have the predator, but there is plenty of prey for these two. There's a resident pair that's been here for several years, and they've had a successful clutch of eggs this year. So great spot to find them because of the amount of people coming in and out. They are pretty neutral for humans, so don't harass them, but you can get a little closer than you typically could at some other locations. Snowy plovers. So this is a case where banding is really fun. So this is named Soyo, Soyo, and he was banded in Outback Key in 2021. And because of those bands, we know which bird this is. So it's one of those things where if you submit the data to the researcher, sometimes they'll reach back out to you and give you some details on an individual that they've been working with. Reddish egrets, you can get these on the East Coast, but this is a coastal bird. The dark morph here is that really nice red color with the loose mane on the neck and kind of a grayish body, pink on the base of the beak and black on the tip. The white morph is going to be pure white. It's going to look very similar to a snowy egret, but the beak and facial skin will remain the same. So great area to find and really watch the hunting behavior of the reddish egret. Merlins, they come in and out of the state during migration. Just like the songbirds, they have to fatten up. So unfortunately, it was not the lucky day for this gray catbird, but the Merlin had to get some food and some calories in it so it could continue on its path further north. So one of the things that makes the Fort DeSoto so interesting during fall or spring rather, fall as well with stuff leaving, but spring specifically is that once the birds have made their journey across, they're really trying hard to get fat reserves built back up so they can get into the breeding ground as soon as possible and get a good territory. And so worm-eating warblers, tons of different warblers, but lots of shy species that are typically harder to find, like this worm-eating warbler, will be out in the open feeding and trying to get as much food as it can to get out of there as quick as possible. So it's a great spot where you can find animals or birds that you typically wouldn't see in the open, like the rose-breasted grosbeak as well. This is a really good-looking male, really bright throat, a little bit on the breast there, and because they have to feed, it's a lot easier to spot these flying to and from perches and then getting a little bit closer. Again, give them respectful distance, but trying to get in a little closer to get the photo, get a good look at it, whatever it is. This park allows you to have that opportunity a little better than a lot of other places. So to wrap up, can you only bird at hotspots? Absolutely not. You should go birding everywhere. Sign up for Rare Bird Alerts or RBAs. That's a great way for you to find birds that aren't typically supposed to be in your area. You can talk to other birders, ask them what they've been seeing lately. Go on Facebook, go on Instagram, send them a message. Most of the time, they're going to be super cool. I found tons of birds by just talking to people. Drive around. It's totally fine to get a little lost. We've got GPS on our phones and we can refine where we are pretty quickly. So it's okay to get a little out there. Set up bird feeders. It's important to feed local birds, but it also gives you the ability to watch for the different behaviors and how they react to each other, what the pecking order is, the hierarchy between, say, a tufted titmouse and a fish crow, and how it works when one of those birds comes to a feeder when the others aren't paying attention. And then with the rare birds, this snow goose was one that I found from March 2021. It was just in a residential park in Seminole County when I was living on that side of Florida, and super easy and nice to find him. So very fortunate to get him. Whooping crane had been a couple years since I'd seen one. I had moved into Lake County. I just did a quick search into the explore function and saw a couple of people had spotted a whooping crane about 30 minutes from where I had moved. And so just jumped in the car with my camera, drove there, and thankfully got it relatively quickly. So it's one of those things where you might have something that you want to see or really haven't seen before, and it's just in your backyard. Scissortail flycatcher. This is a not a very good photo, but this is a nemesis bird for me for several years. Nemesis birds are ones where you've gone out and tried to locate it multiple times, and every time that you've looked, it's evaded you. I have gone, I don't know how many times to try and find a scissortail, usually over in the Apopka area, and every time I just miss it by a day. But I had gotten the alert for a scissortail. I dropped everything I was doing and went to go find it. Thankfully, the guy who had originally reported it the day before was there, helped explain that the Western kingbirds would fly into the tree first, and then the scissortail would fly in. A couple of minutes later, the Westerns fly in, and a few seconds behind the Western was the scissortail. So finally knocked it off my life list and marked that nemesis off. And then the broad-billed hummingbird, this is an Arizona species. This was in Alachua County. People were driving up from Miami to get this. It's a beautiful little hummingbird. Just some guy had his hummingbird feeder set up in his backyard. Noticed this wasn't similar to his ruby throats, contacted the local Audubon. Guy came out with a camera, photographed it, and it blew up. I was extremely fortunate. I was happy with just a photo at distance, but it flew into the bush that was right in front of me and posed and preened. So it was very wonderful experience. But with that, I want to thank you. I know I ran a little over time, but I really appreciate all of your patience and attention. And if anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. And then here are, if you're interested in either, if you don't have eBird, the link on the right is to eBird. The center is for our club in Marion Audubon, and then left is my website. If you're interested in any of those, the URLs or the QR codes will bring you right to those pages.
Fantastic presentation, Max.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's great talk, a lot of input, great